Hi, my name is Emeka Morrow, and welcome to Growth is Personal. Each week, I share insights and strategies that will equip you to accelerate your personal and professional growth and bring you conversations that will empower you to thrive in life, career, and business. Welcome to Growth is Personal podcast. Today, I have a special guest. His name is Luke Iorio.
Iorio. Iorio.
Iorio. Okay, right. So, Luke Iorio is a transformation coach, a guide, an advisor, and a host of much talked about podcast on this walk. Luke has walked alongside tens of thousands of clients and listeners as they search for meaning, purpose, and alignment. Luke's passion for helping others stems from his own spiritual path as he journeys with the beauty and joy of reconnecting with one's true nature, finding rebalance, and feeling connected, healed, and whole. As the previous president and CEO for the Institute for Professional Excellence in Coaching, iPEC, Luke had the unique and fortunate opportunity to work with influential people and organizations who were not satisfied with life and business as usual, granting him access to a laboratory of transformation that few people have heard. Luke continues to serve as partner and board member for iPEC, and the insights and experiences he gleaned continue to inform his coaching, retreats, and podcasts. Wow, amazing. Welcome to the show, Luke. It's good to have you here.
Thank you, Amika. I've been looking forward to this.
Great. So we're going to have conversations. One of the key topic for us today is talking about burnout and redirection. How you can, if you're experiencing burnout or you have experienced burnout, what are the lessons you've learned from there? How then, if someone is going through burnout, how can you have a redirection such that you begin to find purpose again, you begin to feel alive again? So we're going to be looking at that conversation today on our conversation with Luke. So Luke, let's talk about your background. Oftentimes when I start this conversation, I like to go back to the basics, go back to our background to kind of unpack how we got to where we are today. Now we're having this conversation. I know you're still on a journey, but where you are today, you can look back and say there were certain beliefs and mindset that have shaped you to who you are today. So let's talk about your background. What are the values and beliefs, a mindset that have shaped you to who you are today?
It's interesting because I think the two values that pop up the most for me have also been a journey of how the beliefs around those values have changed. So for me, two of the values that I've noticed they've been important to me, but they've been present throughout the whole of my life, are values around freedom and values around balance. And yes, there's some other values there around my family and connection and things like that, but freedom and balance, I think, tell a lot more of the tale. And what really is kind of what the journey has meant is that when I used to look at these values, and this is actually true for both of them, was that freedom and balance to me, I used to define in relatively external or circumstantial ways, meaning that freedom was that notion of to do what I want, when I want, with whom I want. Balance was looking at, well, if the situation is right, like if I've got everything in its rightful place in my life, then I'll have balance. Just like if I'm doing what I want, when I want, with whom I want, I have freedom. And what I learned as I went on this trajectory, knowing that freedom and balance were important to me, was that when you define things that external to yourself, you are, effectively giving away so much of your power, of your sovereignty, saying these situations around me get to dictate whether I have that or not. Well, later on in life, especially, as I started to make some shifts and then some further shifting that I went through with burning out, I then began to recognize and redefine these values from the inside out. And so that freedom was no longer about the circumstantial. Freedom was much more about this idea of being free within, free from, all of the different ways that we create that limitation on ourselves, on our thinking, on the way we show up. Balance in terms of inner balance, so that at any given time, regardless of what was going on, I could feel like I was centered, I was grounded within, And I even use the analogy for balance of we think of balance a little bit more like the scales of justice, where everybody's trying to measure everything out and keep it all balanced in their life.
Mm.
But I think a better metaphor for that is a surfer, because if you have really strong inner balance like the surfer, you can go with the breaking of the waves. And so inner balance to me is that we can go with the breaking of life. We can watch it ebb, we can watch it flow, and we can move in whatever direction, and we still have balance because it's something that comes in and wells up from inside of us. And so for me,
Mm.
freedom and balance, that first half of my life, so to speak, maybe a little bit more than that, uh, it was something that I defined very much outside of myself. And then I transitioned and really started to learn a much deeper understanding of those values and was able to define them from an internal state, an internal quality that I was looking to embody. And that tells a lot of, there's a lot more stories to go into, but that tells a lot of the kind of the journey that I've been on, and the way in which things have evolved in my life.
Hmm. I like the part where you talk about balance. I wanted to let us talk about that a little bit more, because a lot of times we talk about, for example, work-life balance, and
Yeah.
we tend to feel that work-life balance has to be like, okay, 50-50,
Right.
where, okay, I have this set of time of that I work, and at this particular time I'm shut down from work, so that I can be able to have a stable life, right?
Yeah.
But from the analogy you gave, with the sulfur,
Mhm.
it means that oftentimes you don't get it 50-50, but you can still create balance even when there's chaos. Like,
Yeah.
because it comes no longer from external factors, it comes from within, a knowing,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
Do you want to share
Yeah.
more on that?
Yeah. It's so I've maintained for a long time that work-life balance, in the way that it's been defined, like you said, everything kind of having a 50-50 or an equal split among, I believe that's a myth. I believe that we wanted to put an image out there that felt good. It felt like, oh, we've got a destination to go for. But anybody who's ever tried to maintain that level of like compartmentalization inside of their life knows that we make plans, and God life laughs. And
Mm,
that's what's inevitably going to happen, is that things are going to be constantly shifting inside of our lives. And so we don't have that level of control, meaning we can't say that everything is going to fall into its equal parts and be balanced in that fashion. Instead, what we do have the ability to affect is the way in which we approach any given situation, the way we approach the changing circumstances of our lives. And so for me, when I started to make that switch towards inner balance and working with a variety of different people, but one teacher in particular, she helped me to start to look at what are the tenets, what are the kind of the pillars, the principles of inner balance. One of which is a really important one, is finding a place of simplicity within your life. And now simplicity doesn't simply mean like essentialism. You got to get a minimalist and get rid of everything. It doesn't mean that at all.
mm,
It means, probably one of the most basic things, I teach this in one of the groups I facilitate, is that we have very often forgotten the difference between what we need and what we want.
mm,
So most of our society is based off of what we want. It's based on desires. It's based on trying to fill ourselves up, based on getting the next title, the next promotion, the next pay raise, whatever it is. And so we're chasing what these wants are, not recognizing that most of the things that we want in our lives are actually just strategies to fulfill a core level need that is actually underneath it all. And so when we begin to understand, well, our real need is to feel connection, our real need is to know our value, our real need is to connect to love or to purpose or to meaning. Now, all of a sudden, we can look at the wants, all these different strategies, all these different things we do in our lives, and realize we overcomplicate a lot. We make things a lot more complicated than they need to be.
mm,
And when we know that, okay, what I really want is connection, I don't need the extra promotion, the job title, the this, the this, the this to have connection. Most of the time, that's a strategy people will use because that they haven't been taught otherwise. And they feel like I've got to make myself all of these things for me to receive connection, to receive love. But
mm,
if we know that's really what our real need is, we can get away from all of these pursuits that actually just complicate things and say, no, what I really need is this. So now, what is standing in the way of me having that? And that's when all of a sudden we can start to excavate a lot of those internal beliefs, a lot of those internal questions of self-worth, or the facing of self-doubt, that actually is what's standing in between us and fulfilling this need in a really healthy and balanced way for ourselves. And so inner balance, and simplicity being just kind of one of those pillars, it allows us to really begin to look within and find this place of settling, and really understand what are the things that separate us from that level of groundedness and comfort and balance that actually is our natural state. And I think that's maybe the last comment to make on it is, we forget nature will always balance itself. Watch what's going on this planet environmentally right now. Nature is going to try to balance itself one way or another. It's true of every ecosystem. Look at any old forest. Look at any look at some of the national parks and the ways in which they've restored balance through the years inside of those ecosystems. We forget as human beings, we're nature. We're part of that. We're not separate from nature. We're governed by the same natural law. And so our bodies always want to come back into balance. It's the natural state of who we are, is that level of equilibrium that exists inside of us. We've got better health. We're better balanced from an emotional standpoint when we have that inner balance. So what this process is, when we turn to inner balance, is really beginning to look at all of the ways that we're trying to look outside of ourselves for what is actually already existing within us, and getting back to that natural state.
Wow. What you just shared now is a masterclass. So it's deep. It's deeper than what we like. Because when you were talking, one of the things that came to my mind is the fact that, when you talk about simplicity and what exactly do we need, and you see that a lot of times, for example, looking at the social media and the way people clamor for followership, right?
Yes.
They feel like the more followers they have, the more relevant that they have, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if they really ask a question of what exactly do I need on social media? What is the purpose of social media? Is the purpose to be connected to people? Then you don't need 100,000 people to feel connected. You could just be one or two people. Not saying that having followers is not good. I mean, it has its own gains. But when you look at what exactly is your goal and your purpose, then you know that some things we bought ourselves about. Some people. I mean, I've literally seen people rant on social media because they lost followers. Like, what is happening? For example, they say LinkedIn is taking my followers. I'm like, what is that really, something that we should be, overcomplicating? Like, so what you shared is really powerful. Like looking at life from a simplicity, and one of the greatest, what was his name, said something about simplicity, that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. But oftentimes, the way to go about things, the innovation we talk about, is by just looking at things from a simplicity perspective. How can we make things simple? Like, okay, let's go into your personal experience with burnout. Like, in your career, in your life, can you share a little bit about how you experience burnout, and what are the signs or triggers that led to burnout?
So I had hit a point in my career where I was really fortunate. I got into this field of coaching when I was relatively young, completely by kind of accident. That's a different story, but it was this beautiful trajectory, and I had the chance to almost grow up with the coaching industry, meaning I've been in the coaching industry now coming up on 19 years. And so when I started in the industry, most of the time you needed to really lean in to try to help somebody understand, well, what is coaching? I don't understand. You're not a sports coach. What do you mean? And so you'd have these very different conversations. And then now today, very, very different, position. So I kind of grew up during that evolution and the maturing process of the industry in that period of time. And as I did, I was with this institute that became one of the premier institutes in the industry for training and certification purposes. And I went on and became actually the CEO. I was the first CEO to take over for the founder when I was just in my mid-30s. And I've been in that position for about 5 years, when all of a sudden I could just feel the amount of pressure that was constantly building up, where it felt like needed to perform at the next level, needed to get the next outcome, needed to continue to grow the school, needed to continue to lead and feel like my employees and my team were satisfied with their work. And it felt like, all things that make sense, but it felt like it at some point you feel like you're in this 360-degree pressure cooker where
Hmm.
you've got all these different expectations that are feel like they're being placed on you, placed on from team members and employees, from partners, from shareholders, from customers, from vendors and other partners. And you feel like you're trying to keep up with all of these demands, all of these expectations. That's what it felt like for me. And so for a while, I was able to sort through that, be able to just keep pushing through, because that was largely how I had done things to that point in my career, was to be resilient, to be strong, keep your head down, keep moving forward, push through. If you're not, if you're not totally energized by something, don't worry about it. You're committed. You've got to keep going. And so I kind of pushed myself and forced myself to keep moving and bringing everything together, and not really stepping back and saying, what's really going on for you right now, Luke? Like what's actually underneath? Why are you not as fulfilled? Why are you not as satisfied? Why are you not as at ease as you had been up until that point in my career? So I wasn't asking those questions. And so some of the signs that started to pop up, I'm easily agitated. It was, very easy for me to feel like the stress and to feel like agitated. When something simple would go wrong, it would feel like, oh my God, look at all this. And you immediately feel like you're getting into a place of overwhelm. Physically, I would notice that I could go through cycles of high volumes of work where I was producing very, very well. But at the end of, let's say, that 3 months or 6 month cycle, I would inevitably get sick for like 3 to 5 days where I was done. Like my body said, you're done. You got nothing left, because I was just running out of energy because of everything I was putting out for so long. I also started to notice tremendous amount of physical tension that I could feel, like in my neck and my shoulders, because I was walking around with that literal tension all throughout the course of my body. Uh, I was dealing with fatigue. It was harder to get out of bed in the morning. All sorts of like these different physical signs.
Yeah.
The emotional ones being like agitation, being just easily frustrated, being impatient was another one. And what I later, now I can look back and go, probably the greatest sign, or what was actually underneath that from a physical standpoint, was that I was a classic case of a dysregulated nervous system. And so my nervous system was constantly operating from that fight, flight, freeze mode, where I was just on adrenaline and stress and cortisol all the time. And so my body was never getting a chance to go into that rest and rejuvenate mode, which is where we do most of our healing, and we feel more peaceful and we're better connected to our executive function. And so the dysregulated nervous system was probably the greatest sign of the degree of burnout that I was heading towards at that time.
Hmm.
So those are some of the signs. That was some of the lead up to, to hitting that stage of burnout.
What you mentioned is typically what a lot of people, I mean, I still know of a friend who reached out to me. I mean, he made a status update at some point. I don't know if he's going to watch this or listen to, like, are you talking about me?
Yeah.
But he
Yeah.
shared with me, and he shared a status and on, this regular status. And he was saying some things about stress and, work and stuff like that. But I could hear from what he was saying that this was a cry for help. Like
Yeah.
he was doing well, like he's doing well with his work, and he's making good money and all.
Yep.
But he was stressed out, and when I
Yes.
asked him, I sent a message. I was like, what's going on? So we'll have a lot of people who are outward or externally, they're doing well, they're looking okay,
Yeah.
but within, they're crying for help. Like, because you mentioned a lot of things, a lot of triggers that I can also attest to, that these things leads to burnout. Now, from all of this experience you've had, then at what point did you now make that you now begin to make that shift to say, you know what, this is a time where I have to take action
Okay.
about this burnout? And what were the things you began to do to change the course of
Mhm.
your life, from burnout to like a redirection?
So I'm going to answer that in a second. I want to add on to what you just started to bring up, because describing even your friend, because I resonate so deeply with that. From the outside looking in, most people thought everything was great for me. They thought everything was going really, really well. And part of the pressure for me that I was also putting on myself was when you are in a position that this was a job that was kind of like a dream job for me. I couldn't believe that I'd been able to do this. I was making really good money. I was providing for my family. I had really good rapport with our students and our team. Like I really thoroughly enjoyed them. It's not like I didn't like working with them. I loved working with them. And so I wanted to keep up appearances. And so
Hmm.
it felt like this even further dichotomy or duality was emerging, because who I was to other people was not who I felt like I was
Hmm.
inside. And
Hmm.
that just starts, I mean, that's a big piece of what felt like it was like almost tearing me apart at times, although consciously I didn't know what was going on. I didn't understand it. So when did it need to change? I can actually I can pinpoint the moment everything did change, because it was such a poignant experience I went through. Uh, in this particular year, I'd gone to 4 funerals in 10 months. 2 were expected, 2 were not.
Hmm.
Of the last 2, one was a family man who was only a couple of years older than I was. He had a couple of girls. His youngest was the same age as my daughter, and it was one of the most painful funerals I've ever been to in my life. It was just gut wrenching, and it hit so close to home that I started walking away like, wow, I can't even imagine what my family would go through if it was me or if my wife or we ever had to go through a circumstance like this.
Hmm.
And then just a few weeks later, as somebody who had been a role model of mine growing up passed away. Now that was normal course of life. He lived well into his 80s, and but at his funeral service, one of his youngest sons, his youngest son, delivered this beautiful eulogy about who he was. And everybody in the room was like, yeah, that's who he was. I can totally relate. That's exactly who he was. And I started to think about the fact, well, if this was my time and it was the end of my life, would people know me the way I know me? Like
Hmm.
if somebody were to eulogize me and they were to say these things, would I say, yeah, they got it. That's exactly who I was? Or would I say, wow, that was the image people had of me, but that's not who I really felt I was.
Wow.
And so I started to sit with that. Well, I came home from that funeral and my wife drops me off. She wanted to do a couple of errands before needing to pick the kids up at school. And I walk into my house, hang up my coat, and I take a couple of steps into like this little sitting room we had. And I broke down in tears, and I just fell to the floor.
Hmm.
And just so much emotion started to pour out, where I could feel the burden and the weight and all the things I did not want to face and had not been willing to look at were just like flooding through me at that point. And after, I'm not sure exactly how long, I start to think, oh, my wife's going to go pick up the kids and let me be the good stereotypical man. I don't want my kids to see me this way. Right.
Hmm.
And so I pick myself up and I go upstairs and I get changed. And I think, let me splash some water on my face before I go back downstairs. And so I walk into the bathroom and I splash some water in my face. And as I look up into the mirror, I make, if you've ever taken a moment to look into a mirror and just look into your own eyes, there's a moment there that you might just catch that energy, that consciousness, that soul that's in every single one of us that doesn't age. And when I
Hmm.
picked up my head at that moment, I made contact with what felt like this younger, more vibrant piece of who it is that I really am, that has never changed, this unbelievable, beautiful energy that's in there for every single one of us. And as I connected to that, I felt this overwhelming emotion start to rise in me. And as it began to rise and hit about my heart before it got to my throat, realized the emotion I was feeling was rage.
Hmm.
And I looked at the mirror and I actually yelled into the mirror, "Where did you go? Why did you leave me?" Because I felt like I had been abandoned by some deeper part of me.
Hmm.
And when I did that, the irony of this, for those that are picturing this, is when you yell into a mirror, it's coming back at you. And so all of a sudden, these questions come back at me of, where did I go? Why did I leave? Meaning, why did I leave this deeper, truer part of who it is that I am? And that's when, I mean, like a ton of bricks, everything hit me of how we as human beings go on these journeys to try to be something, to try to prove ourselves, to try to be all these things to other people.
Hmm.
And we end up actually walking away from the truest part of who it is that we are. And we take on these roles, we take on these identities, we take on these commitments and obligations, we take on these limiting beliefs and fears and everything else. And the whole time, all we're trying to do is to get back home, back to that place that is the truest essence of who we are. And so I have this unbelievable experience in that particular morning. And it was within a couple of days that I actually turned to two of my most active business partners, one being the founder. And I said, I need to make some changes. I know that we had to do some restructuring anyway internally for the company. And I said, I can lead us through the restructuring that needs to be done. Probably take me about 18 months. But if I do it alone, meaning if I don't bring in a whole lot of other resources to do this, I'm done. Like there's going to be no blood left in the stone. I'm tapped. Or we could start bringing in those resources now. It's a little bit ahead of when we financially wanted to make those commitments, but let's bring those resources in now. I can do it with them. They'll lead the charge, but I'll support them in the process. And at that point, we can figure out what comes next and where I actually go. And so anyway, that actually began a transition for me of bringing in a couple of other partners and ultimately training the CEO who took over for me and is still there now. But it was that poignant experience, that moment where all of a sudden I woke up to something, and it was kind of one of those things of once you've seen it, you can't unsee it.
Oh man, what you just shared, I know those who are going to be listening are going to benefit from, because what you just shared is so important for our lives, because you shared something about an eulogy being said about someone, and you said, what would you want to be said about you?
Yeah.
And what is said about you, if you happen to look at your eulogy or listen to your eulogy, would it be the exact thing or the exact person who you were?
Yeah.
And then you went on to say that if you look into the mirror and you can ask yourself some critical question, that who are you? Like, where have you been?
Yeah.
And I think it's so important, for anyone listening now or going to be watching this, I think it's important we take some time, because I've been in that position too. Because when you were sharing, I remember times where I think that was a few years ago, and I just looked myself in the mirror. I'm like, what happened to you? I think, what happened was I used to live in Nigeria. So I moved to Canada, where I currently live now. And at some point, one of my friends, when I was leaving, when she knew I left, she said, Emeka, it looks like you've lost your fire. And beyond that, I said, I kind of snubbed that out. I was like, no, I got it. Because I was doing a whole lot in Nigeria. When I came to Canada, new country, settling in, all of that.
Yeah.
And I got to that point where I looked myself in the mirror. I'm like, Emeka, where are you? Like, and that was a wake up call for me. And, all of these that you say in podcast, books, and I had to go back to who I was, because I've come to realize that until we ask ourselves those questions, until we look into the mirror and ask ourselves, oh man, this is powerful, we won't really get to the point where we understand that, are we truly living our life, or are we truly living the life of someone else, or the life that has been dictated by even our jobs, right?
Yeah.
So it's so powerful what you just shared. And I hope that those who are listening or those who are going to be watching can really go back after listening to this episode, go and look into the mirror and ask yourself this critical question: that who are you? Are you really living the life that you truly desire to live?
Yeah. I love that you brought up that somebody had posed back to you of, it seems like some of that fire was gone, because that is exactly, I mean, that I can relate to that feeling so deeply, where it felt like that fire was beginning to dissipate. It was beginning to wane. And that's so much of what we want to bring back in our lives. And the other thing that popped in is that a friend of mine, this was actually recently a men's circle that I had facilitated. And as part of a circle, even as facilitator, I actually share within that circle as well. And a friend at that point had just mentioned, there's this phrase I heard years ago from a mentor of mine. I think it might be relevant to something you just shared. I go back and I ask myself the question, is my soul in the game? Right? We think about, is your head in the game? You hear that if you've ever been an athlete, or is your head in the game? But in life, to step back and go, is your soul in the game? And that's when all of a sudden, when you can step back and connect to that, and then you can find, wait, no, this is how my soul gets in the game. That fire comes back like you wouldn't believe. It
Yeah.
just starts building up in the belly and it wants to come back.
Hmm. Hmm. This is like a retreat. I feel like a retreat. Okay, let's talk about. So we want to give, to share some tips,
Yeah.
for those who are struggling, like people are struggling with recognizing the early signs of burnout, right?
Yes.
What are the common indicators for professionals?
Mhm.
Because I know most of my listeners here are professionals, some are
Yeah.
entrepreneurs. What are the early signs of burnout, and how
Mhm.
can you proactively address those signs?
Yeah. So let me build on a few of the things that I said before. So certainly from an emotional state, there was more of that agitation, that frustration, that impatience that was there. But I'd also add in anxiety, like increasing anxiety can be a big piece of this. That almost I don't want to say it as simple as like ADHD feeling, but you feel like you have a lot more trouble focusing than you did previously,
Hmm.
where you feel like you're kind of trying to juggle everything. You're trying to hop from one thing to the next to keep up with it all. That certainly is true for it. Some of the physical signs I was mentioning before, constant ups and downs in your energy, where you're dropping into fatigue. And when you're not in fatigue and you're going, it's more like you're going from a place of adrenaline as opposed to a place of strength. That's another part of it. Constant tension inside of your body, getting sick more often, more susceptible to colds. So your immune system is just not functioning as strongly as it used to be.
Hmm.
Those are all some pretty good signs. I find now for myself, what I found is you've got to try to identify like what's your game, what are your default coping mechanisms that you turn to. And I noticed for me, part of that was control. So I tried to, the more I would feel stressed, the more I would try to control. And of course, the more I'd try to control, the more I'd realize less I could control less than I thought I did, which would make me more stressed.
Hmm.
So you've got to also recognize what are some of your patterns that when you get really, really stressed, you're up against it. What do you do? Because you're going to all of a sudden, once you get aware of what that natural tendency is, that default tendency is that you have, you're going to start to watch that game pop up a lot more often. And it'll give you a cue of, wow, if it's going on that often, I must be under a lot of stress. So those are some of the signs that are there. The flip side of it, I'm going to go back to I mentioned one of the keys to me was recognizing I had a dysregulated nervous system. All the symptoms I just mentioned are related to having a dysregulated nervous system. And I was beginning my journey with meditation at this time. That was extremely helpful, but there's a specific type of meditation and there's another practice that I think would have been even more helpful to me. The meditation that I would have benefited from more at that stage, I didn't learn it for several years, was more of a somatic mindfulness approach, meaning to be able to get physically into your body when you meditate, to be able to do a body scan, to be able to be aware of the way in which different tension and stress is being handled by your body so
Hmm.
that somatically you can connect to it and begin to release it, to unwind it. That's one key thing. Another practice that really supports that is breath work. And so getting into any form of breath work, whether it's through yoga or it's through a particular breath work modality or school, whatever it is, breath work tends to work with both your nervous system and your emotional state at the same time, and it can lead you to releasing a lot of the bound up energy, bound up emotions that we don't usually have a healthy way of releasing and expressing within our lives. So meditation, if meditation's not for you, looking at breath work, those types of practices are incredibly helpful. I did exercise, but I exercised probably more vigorously at those times, meaning it was always about like pushing myself harder. It was still like, even the way I worked out was symptomatic of what was going on for me. I needed more of some restorative type of practices. It would have been helpful. I was a runner at that time. It would have been helpful if I was going out for runs, but leaving my watch at home, leaving the timer off, just go and just enjoy the run for the sake of getting air in your lungs. Get out into nature is another huge one, because nature has this unbelievable way to get out onto a hiking trail, and nature, you'll literally just feel your blood pressure begin to drop the
Hmm.
longer you spend out in nature. And that's actually quite literally scientifically proven, that effect of being in nature for usually it's a minimum of about 30 to 40 minutes will naturally have that effect on your body. So those can be very helpful. those are all things to support your physical change. The breath work will help more of some of the emotional shifting. And then for me, something I didn't have at the time, which I wish I did, it's actually a big reason why I do a lot of this facilitation now, is I would have joined some form of a circle. So a circle is not necessarily like a support group. It's a different form of mindful expression that allows you to really start to express from the heart what you are going through at any given time, and to
Right.
have other people hold that space for you so that you can feel like you're being witnessed, you're being seen in the experience of life that you're having. It's not about them fixing you. It's not about somebody coaching you through it. It's quite literally about you expressing it, because when you clear from that standpoint, when you let go of things from that standpoint, all of a sudden that deeper insight, that inner teacher that exists inside of every single one of us starts to come back online, and you can hear those deeper questions that we were posing before. You can hear some of the insight and the guidance that naturally is inside every single one of us. And so circling would have been another practice that I would have incorporated very, very early on into that kind of readjustment shifting period.
Awesome. Awesome. Meditation. Yeah. A lot has been said about meditation. And I think it's very, few people know how to do it. Like people think, oh, meditation is just for me to just keep quiet and just look into the sky.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you talk about breath work. But the one I want to emphasize on is meditation. How do you graphically do meditation? Like,
Sure.
is there an effective way of meditation?
Yep. For me, and I would say meditation's very personal, meaning what works for me may not work for you, Amika. It may not work for everybody listening. So I went through and I actually experienced, it's got to be at least 6, 7, maybe even 8 different types of meditation at least, before I found what typically tends to work for me the most often. For me, one of the things I mentioned was a somatic mindfulness approach, meaning when I begin to meditate, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to begin to focus on my breath, which is very common for most meditations. But when I'm doing it, I'm very much paying attention to the sensation of breathing. So I'm feeling the inhale and I'm feeling the exhale. I'm feeling what's going on in my body, maybe across my chest or in my belly as I inhale. I'm going to feel again, maybe at my upper back or in my neck, what happens when I exhale. So I get very aware of the physical sensations that are going on in my body as I begin to drop in. Beyond that, I'll do a body scan is usually one of the first things I do, meaning I'll take a moment, and as I am just gently breathing, I'll pay attention to, what does the crown of my head feel like? What does my brow feel like? What does my jaw feel like? I'll use the jaw as a good example. Usually when I bring my attention to my jaw, I go, why is it so stiff? Why is it so tense? And then I just let my jaw go slack. And as soon as you do that, you can feel the relaxation that actually starts to happen. I feel, is there tension in my neck? There is. Let me adjust my shoulders a little bit. And then you sit into it and you realize you open a little bit more. So I'll actually scan through my whole body and look for those places that need a little space, that need a little breath, that need a little ease. And that allows me to begin to drop in more deeply. There's a nervous system switch that's going on, is that you're dropping out of your sympathetic nervous system response to your parasympathetic nervous response, meaning moving from the stressed response or fight, flight, freeze mode into your rest and restore type of mode, which is your parasympathetic. And that's actually happening as you begin to breathe more deeply, relax all of the muscles, and drop in. Now, once I'm in that state, it depends on the given day as to what I'm choosing to use my meditation for, the intention of my meditation. It used to be originally just for things like stress reduction, but I found that to be like surface level meditation to me, because it helped absolutely, and it's a great place to start, is to reduce stress. But once you're in that deeper state, you can use it to evoke feelings of compassion and empathy. You can connect more deeply to gratitude. You can pose a question to yourself and just allow yourself to hold space for that question and see what begins to emerge. So you can do some inquiry, contemplation through meditation. So I use any number of those types of things, but the process begins as I described. for me, because it literally relaxes everything so I can be in a state of ease. And then whatever I want to introduce after that comes with that ease. It's more spacious to allow whatever needs to emerge to emerge.
Great. I like the way you painted the graphic from your head and all, and that's fantastic. I want to also ask, does this also help with productivity? Like, does it help you become more productive?
It does. It's part of the the confusing part about meditation. And I'm trying to remember it, honestly, I want to say it was actually the first person I heard say this, I think was Russell Simmons, who's a huge believer in meditation and mindfulness. And I think he used to joke, on the days that I find I'm too busy to meditate, that's when I know I need to meditate longer. So it was that thought of the busier you are, the more meditation that you need. And the reason for it and why it actually makes you more productive is it's like a reset. So if you're dropping in from a place of meditation, and even if it's just 10 minutes long, it could be even 5 or 6 minutes with some good deep breath work or deep breathing in what you're doing. You're creating a reset inside of your body, inside of your emotional system, and inside of your nervous system. And when those things reset, you have greater access to your executive function, your cognitive function in your brain. And so you're quite literally dropping and releasing out the things that usually stand in the way of you being more productive, because you're clearing out the anxieties, you're clearing out the worries, you're clearing out the 17 thoughts that are racing to try to get your attention. If you can allow that to begin to settle and be you think of a snow globe, right? Is if you shake up the snow globe and everything's going everywhere, you're not going to get much done. But if you can allow that snow globe to settle so that you can see straight through it again and it's nice and peaceful, that's sort of what you're doing with your mind when you go through meditation, so that you have that much more access to higher cognitive function. You're going to focus better. You're going to concentrate better. You're going to have more ideas. You're going to think more strategically and holistically. All of those factors start to come back as you develop more and more of those meditation and mindfulness muscles.
Awesome. This is going to be very helpful, I know. Let's talk about so for those who are going through the emotional aftermath of burnout, what do you advise listeners or those who are going to be watching who may be going through similar experience? So how do you navigate the emotional aftermath of burnout? So for example, the picture where you were looking in the mirror and you almost felt like a rage. How do you then deal with an emotional aftermath? Like, how do you deal with that experience? And so that you don't go, because oftentimes what I see or hear people, what happens to people after that is that they probably go down back into some sort of depression and all of that. But how do you pick yourself up from that experience and create a path forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad you frame it that way, because when you start to face some of these emotions and insights that you've been turning away from for a while, and then all of a sudden you turn towards them, it can be overwhelming. It can cause things like a situational depression, because it feels like you're now on the wrong path, perhaps. And so it's a few things. Aside from the exercise, being in nature, those types of things I talked about before, having some type of a support structure in place for yourself. And that support structure should do a few things. Number one, it should take care of you physically, because taking care of you physically and through your nervous system, through things like meditation, like we just mentioned, that's going to create greater stability inside of your system, which will make the emotional processing go easier. For the emotional processing, having a place you can turn to for the healthy expression of those emotions. So things like circling that I mentioned, could be working with a coach or a therapist or another trained professional. It could be some other type of support group that ideally is facilitated so that it's not just venting sessions, but it is actually releasing whatever it is that's coming up. I would have some type of support structure for that. Part of that support structure that is really important is that the people you're there with, or the coach therapist you're working with, should be able to hold a vision of you for the strength that actually exists in you, so that you can feel like you're being witnessed into the greater possibility of who you are, as opposed to, meaning you're being seen for who it is you're becoming, you're being seen for who it is and what's changing in you,
Mm.
as opposed to when we go back and we try to get this support from a family member or a friend. And I'm not to say that they can't be wonderfully loving. By and large, though, they can only see us as who they already know us to be. And so the way they see us is reinforcing perhaps of the very things that we're actually trying to change.
Mm.
So we need a support structure that can see who we're trying to becoming, what we're aspiring for, even while we might not even know that yet. We're still trying to figure it out, but they can hold that space because they're not attached to our old story. They're not attached to who we used to be.
Right.
So that system can be very, very important as well. And then I think lastly, the other thing I wanted to mention is I'm also a huge proponent of journaling. And when we journal, it's a way of being able to cathartically release so much of what's being processed inside of ourselves. And why that becomes so important is that if we don't have that release, if we don't have that outlet where we can be completely honest and just let out whatever needs to come out, we'll end up repressing that and we'll end up in places of rumination because our mind wants to process it. But if it can't get it out, it's going to keep bringing it back up over and over and over and over again. So we need these systems and structures that allow us to literally move it out of ourselves. Journaling is a huge piece of that. And again, a lot of studies have shown the effectiveness of journaling when you allow yourself to feel what it is that you need to release as you are writing it down on the paper. Allow the tears to fall, allow the anger to come out, allow whatever it is to be translated into those words energetically as you write them out.
Mm.
Pairing that with a coach, a therapist, a circle, some form of professional facilitation gives you the chance to not only let the energy out, but to continue the processing so that it gets healed. And so it's to me, all of that describes a system of support to put in place for yourself. And there's a lot of different means to be able to do that, but that's the type of structure that I would recommend, is type of structure that I have put in place for myself at times, and obviously I do for clients.
Awesome. And something came to my mind where you were talking about having the support system. So for those who do not have a means to create those support systems, say for example, by way of financial means to hire therapists and all of that, how can they on their own create those structures or system? Is there a way to do that?
Yeah, I think there is. So obviously, a lot of the type of practices, whether it be meditation, breath work, certainly journaling as well. I'll be honest, there's so much you can look up online and grab on YouTube and things like that for really good proven practices. So you can start to figure out your own personal practice to be able to spend time journaling every day, to spend time doing a little bit of meditation or breath work every single day. You can start to put that in place. Have somebody that you feel like you can be accountable to, that will, even this can be a friend, as long as you know it's a friend who will willingly challenge you, so that you have somebody that you feel like you're being held accountable. Like, hey, did you do that today? Are you doing your practices? Are you doing your work? Have somebody like that can kind of hold that space and you can be accountable to. That's key. And then look at the many different ways that you can get some type of support, like a circle. Meaning that one of the outcomes, for instance, of the last few years and the pandemic and everything else, was that a lot of support services needed to go online and become virtual. And because of that, the cost came down for a lot of things. So there are different forms of virtual therapy, virtual circling in groups. There's a newer group, I think it's called PACE Group, that started online, actually backed by I think it was the CEO of Pinterest, founder of Pinterest is backing it. That gets it now, you're talking services that are now maybe under $100 a month, in some cases under $50 a month, and you don't have to be in them perpetually. Get them for a little bit of a period of time. So it's no longer, potentially as much out of pocket as it used to be. So it's becoming more affordable. And if that still is a stretch, like I said, put your personal practices in place for now.
Yeah.
Find somebody who you can be accountable to, who can hold that space so that you're following through on those things. And then when it's time, or you do have the means to get into whatever that next level of support is, then you can do so.
Yes, sir. Awesome. Okay, so burnout oftentimes stems from a lack of work-life balance or boundaries, right? So how can you establish healthy boundaries and effectively manage your time and energy to prevent burnout? So
Yeah.
how do you set healthy boundaries for yourself so that you don't experience burnout?
So I'm going to go back to when we were talking about inner balance. I described simplicity before. One of those other pillars that I want to introduce is stability. And so stability has to do with your boundaries
Mm,
is part of that process. And so what most people don't realize is that they want to think about their boundaries as in fact a need. Boundaries are not, they are truly a base need because we need to be able to create a container for ourselves where we feel like we can be safe, where we feel like we have the support that we need, that we're not putting ourselves out beyond what we're capable of doing at any given time. And so we need to create that container that allows us to be at our best, to be able to be well rested, to be able to be emotionally balanced, all those types of things. So to know what your boundaries are, think about what's the container that I need. So
mm,
classic example, I'll use one of my own. One of the my classic, coping mechanisms was being a people pleaser, and so I would overcommit myself to overgive, over support on a frequent basis. That was my way of trying to control for balance, meaning that if I saw something in need, let me try to make it better because then my world will feel more stable and
mm,
all is good. Or let me try to, do these things for that person because they're going to like me more and that's going to keep things more stable in my life. But what I was doing was I was overcommitting myself and overgiving in every which direction, which just added to my burnout because I wasn't getting back to rejuvenate, to rest and recuperate the way that I needed to. So for me, I had to recognize, well, what's the container that I need? I recognized I needed a certain amount of time each week for meditation and exercise and personal self-care. I
right.
recognized that I needed certain space to be able to kind of be on my own, meaning solitude is important for me. I tend to be more on the introverted side of the introversion extroversion scale. And if I don't get some solitude time, I'm just a ticking time bomb for me to for me to crash. And so I know that I need at least like once a week for a couple of hours that recharge reset time. For me, that's usually something like out in nature, taking a walk, something like that. So I know that that's really important to me. I also looked at my calendar in terms of I'm sorry, in terms of how much I was doing and who I was doing it with, and I started to look at energetically how how well does this exchange energetically work for me? Meaning, am I putting everything in and not getting a whole lot back? Am I, is does that feel balanced to me? And
Mm,
when I say balanced in that exchange with another relationship, it doesn't mean 50-50. That's not what I mean. I could put a lot in, but if there's that one thing that I'm getting out that has a lot of value to me, then it's fine that it feels like I'm putting out a lot because that one thing has high worth. But in a lot of instances, we find we're putting out a lot and we're not getting that value exchange coming back to us. And so now it's like I'm constantly emptying my cup and I'm not putting anything back in.
mm, mm,
Right. And so I had to start to look at what's that container that's going to support. So I looked at, like I said, I'm going to look at the physical things. I'm going to look at self care. I'm going to look at how much space do I need for me. I'm going to look at the balance in my relationships and how well balanced do those particularly feel professionally, personally, and otherwise. What adjustments might need to be there. And that's going to help you start to be able to articulate these are the boundaries that I need. And when you can come at things and say, I need to take this time for me. I know you guys are all getting together, or I know you're asking me to attend this other meeting, but I have to say no to that because I've got some other priorities that I've got to focus on, or I can't be at my best.
mm,
99% of people will look at you and go, all right, good on you. Good for you. Take it. Do what you need.
mm, mm. That's powerful. You share. I like the analogy of container. I think everyone should create that container, and the content in the container would differ, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
for example, you mentioned your container is to create that self that timeout, like where you have that block of time where you take to meditate.
Yeah.
Some people, that container could contain things like going for a massage or something like that.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So I think that's very important that you painted that, or you give us a picture of what it looks like a container, to be able to create those boundaries. Because I think what happens is a lot of times, people don't really know what it means to set the boundaries, and that's why they keep going, running, and giving and doing all of this, live, YouTube live, different things,
Yeah.
just to feel relevant. But at
Yes.
the end of the day, are they really getting back inside? Are they really refueling themselves? Right. So I think it's very important. This is a very good analogy for me as well, because I actually wrote it down.
Mm.
What is your container? And for each container, what are the levels? From the bottom level to the half level to the top level, and how do you then place priority on those
Yeah.
content in the container?
Yeah. Well
Okay.
said.
Yeah. You want to share more about that, or?
No, I like the fact that you just tied it back to what's your priority for each of these things as well, right? And because
Yeah.
if we try to do everything, then we're back into trying to keep all the plates spinning, right? But
Right.
if we prioritize it and say, listen, ideally, I would do all these things in my container. But from a priority standpoint, if I get to these 3 or 4 on a, let's say, weekly basis, I know I'm going to be in really good shape more often than not.
Okay. Yes. Yes. Very important. So, final question here before I go to the final 3 questions. So, burnout can lead to a feeling of guilt, shame, or failure. How can individuals reframe their perspective on
Mm.
burnout and see it as an opportunity for growth, resilience, or personal transformation? Or
Yeah.
maybe they shouldn't. It should be labeled as burnout, or can it be
Yeah.
reframed as an opportunity for growth?
Yeah. I appreciate that, because I think, let me explain it this way. We have convinced ourselves, based on kind of society and conditioning and the way that we do things, that we should be on this perpetual direction of growth, that we should always be like steadily climbing and going.
Hmm.
And that's going back to what I said before. We are part of nature. Nature always wants to balance itself. Well, as we know, nature goes through cycles. There is a spring, there's a summer, there's a fall, and yes, there is a winter. And we have to recognize that every once in a while, we're going to go through these winters in our lives. Burnout is one of those winters. It's not to say that there's literally nothing wrong with it whatsoever. It's that you're being asked to go back into a place of rest and rejuvenation for a period of time, because there are some things that need to be released. There are things that may need to be restructured. And what we forget is that all of, I'm in the Northeast of the United States. So we go through the beautiful transition in the fall with all of the leaves falling. And what we forget is that those leaves have to fall, because that decay, which gets composted during the winter, is what feeds what gets grown in the spring. And so we need to go through these periods of time where we're allowing the things to fall that need to fall. We're allowing them to go dormant so that they can be gestated, they can be composted, so that they can become the fertilizer of what seeds we have been planting to grow in our next chapter. And so burnout is part of that process. Now, ideally, we don't get to the place of burnout. Ideally, for me, why did burnout occur? Was I was ignoring that natural process. I was ignoring what was going on. And when we see ourselves start to tend that way, we can go through it consciously, as opposed to hitting a full stage of burnout. We don't have to hit that. But if you do, know that it was life and your body and your emotions and your heart saying, if you're not going to take a break, we're going to make it you take a break. We're going to you're going to go into this phase, because we've been trying to get your attention. First, we started doing it politely, and now we're not going to be polite about it because you ignored us. So we're going to bring you to this stage, right? But that's all it is. It's just a renewal cycle that we actually happen to be on in a given time. For me, one of those signs that I missed was that the way that I was living and working was based on goals and a vision that I had set for myself, but I'd set it out 12, 13, 14 years prior. Well, I was no longer the same person. And so I was trying to live according to who I used to be. And I didn't give myself that chance to say, wait a minute, my vision has changed. My values have even changed. I don't define them the same way that I used to define them. My beliefs have changed. I'm becoming a different person, or I should really say I'm becoming a different version of myself, but I was still trying to hold on to the old version. And so
Mm,
for me, I had to go through that phase to say, okay, I can let that part of me, I can let those visions that I used to have, those goals, I can let those go now because they don't fit me anymore. It's time for me
mm,
to go back into the winter time, because then in the spring, I get to recreate, I get to renew.
mm. This is what you just shared. Is if there's nothing we shared in the whole of our conversation, this is something for someone to take home. Like you, you have to get to the point where you realize that some things have to go back into the back burner, or some things have to be let go for you to be able to grow.
Yeah.
And that the going or the letting them go doesn't mean that you are less of yourself, or because I shared one of my first episodes was growth and goals, and the
Mm.
fact that most people who are goal oriented tend to keep going, whereas like you just shared, oftentimes the goals we set maybe 10 years ago, we have outgrown the values around those goals. And
Yeah.
now, which means our goal has to change now because we're on a particular journey, right? But
Yeah.
what people tend to do is to hold on to those goals, not knowing, and they feel burnout because they're trying to achieve something, but the values that help them define that goal that time has changed. They're totally different, and they keep holding on to it and the experience. But when we realize that the journey of personal growth, the journey of a professional growth would evolve, and oftentimes
Yeah.
those goals we set for ourselves would change. So it's okay, to let those things go,
Yeah.
right? I've seen people who struggle and they come to me and say, "Hey, I've been doing this and doing this particular thing and it's not working out." And I
Yeah.
ask, you, this is something you wanted to do when you were in high school or university, but right now you have grown, you have changed, you're probably in a different environment, or you're probably the economy or the marketplace
Yeah.
is telling you that this thing you're holding on to is no longer relevant.
Yeah.
Move on, do something else, right?
Yeah.
We keep holding on to that because with this sense of kind of insecurity and all, but what you just
Yeah.
shared right now is so important. Hmm.
And Mika, you're on it, man. You get it, because we get these parts of our lives that are saying, okay, it's time to let go. And we, it's the part of who we are as human beings, that we love certainty. We want anything that makes us feel safe. And so at
Right.
times we will cling, we will grasp, we will hold on to whatever we possibly can, because that's what we know.
Hmm.
And it's easier for us to, we think it's easier for us to stay there, because if we let it go, well, then who am I now?
Hmm.
What comes next? I don't know what comes next. I don't have the answers for that. But at least if I hold on to this, I'm going
Hmm.
to feel like I know the answers. And so
Hmm.
there comes this time where we have to let go, because if you don't let go, then you're not creating any space for the new to enter. And that's, it's a very difficult process, but it's also, frankly, it's the cycle of life.
Sake of life. Okay, so we're down to a final three questions. So the quick
Cool.
questions I'm going to ask, and you could answer in one word or you could speciate on the word. The first question is, what is your favorite book that you can say it's a Hall of Fame book of
Mm,
all time that is that you can
okay.
always recommend to someone?
For me, the first one that came to mind is The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer. And the piece about that is so remarkable is he was really well known for his first book called The Untethered Soul, which is this unbelievably beautiful, deep spiritual book that really talks about how do we get back into that state of freedom for naturally who it is that we really are. But his follow-up, The Surrender Experiment, actually describes what he was going through in his life at the time that he wrote The Untethered Soul. And at the time he wrote this unbelievably powerful spiritual book, he was going through allegations of fraud. He was up against possible bankruptcies. He had all of these people that were really making life very difficult. And the entire time, he just kept surrendering into, this is going, whatever path this is taking me on is the path that I am supposed to be on. And so I'm going to keep trusting into life. I'm going to keep surrendering into life and watching where this takes. And sure enough, I'm not going to give away the actual story, but the things that needed to resolve resolved. But to
Mm,
know what he was going through in his life while he was writing this unbelievably beautiful spiritual book is it was just absolutely astounding. And
Hmm.
so for me, the surrender experiment, and sure, knowing some of the context and story behind all of it, um, it's extremely powerful. And again, that's by Michael Singer.
Hmm. The surrender experiment. Great, great one. Noted that. What is your favorite travel destination of all time?
Ooh, I got to give you two, because right before the pandemic, I got to take my whole family, including my parents, to back to Italy. And my parents had never been. That's where our most of our heritage is Italian. And being able to take them there, being able to take my parents overseas for the first time in their lives, but then being able to take my kids and my wife, it was just an amazing experience. And of course, the food in Italy never hurts. So that was
Right.
amazing. But the only reason why I say two is because the other place that I go back to whenever I can, it just has a special place in my heart, is Sedona, Arizona.
Oh,
And Sedona is, between the natural wonder that is there, it is an unbelievably beautiful landscape, but there is something energetically that is just very deeply rooted and connected there. I always feel, I feel like I'm going home, and I feel completely refreshed whenever I come back from Sedona.
awesome. And the last one here is, what is the one routine, it could be two, that people ignore that would help to deal with burnout?
Hmm. Absolutely. So, the biggest routine that most people ignore is breathing.
Hmm.
And what I mean is we quite literally just take for granted this unbelievable, system that we have that we call the body, and the miraculous ways that it works. And if you're not going to do meditation, or it just isn't clicking for you right now, if you don't want to go for really understanding breath work, if you did nothing more than take 10 deep conscious breaths a day, where you sat for 30 seconds, 40 seconds, and you just took a full inhale and a full exhale, filling up your belly, filling up your chest, and then letting it all release. You did nothing more than that 10 times, right? 45 seconds at most out of your day. You will be surprised at just how much that begins to relax you. The other
Hmm.
beauty of that is if you do it, you're also much more likely to sit for 3 to 5 minutes. And all of a sudden it becomes a little bit more of a basic meditation for you. But if I could say you do nothing else, start there, and you will notice an impact even just in as little as a couple of weeks.
Awesome, awesome. That this has been a very impactful and enriching conversation. I could say this is one of, I think I've had one of this type of conversation since I started this podcast, where you're talking more soul stuff, and it's really a conversation that I would definitely come back to. And if you're watching on YouTube and this something resonate with you, please leave a comment in the chat so we can bring more of this kind of conversation to you. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple, also ensure that you leave your rating or leave your review so that we can know how best to serve you with conversations like this. Luke, it's been a tremendous privilege of mine to have this conversation with you. Do you have any final words to share with listeners or those who are going to be watching?
I just think number one, thank you, Amika. This has been a very enjoyable conversation to have with you. I'm not sure if I have too much else to share other than simply take that time to follow up on a few of the insights that maybe you received from today's conversation. Take that moment to be with yourself in the mirror, to ask one or two of those deeper questions.
Hmm.
Take a moment to maybe journal and allow through whatever it is that just needs to pour out of you. Set a timer for even just 10 minutes and just keep writing. If it's just taking those 10 conscious breaths, whatever it is, the most important resource you still have in your life is time. You have given us your time to be here to listen to this conversation and to listen to this podcast. So take from that time and figure out what's the one or two things you're going to walk away with for you that are personal to you, and begin to integrate them into your life. That's how you're going to keep growing in a very, very personal way.
Yeah. And before we wrap things up, I wanted to bring it up because I think this, the podcast that you have, Luke, really ties into our conversation today
Yeah.
on this walk. Do you want to share a little bit to our audience about
Mhm.
your podcast on this walk and
Sure.
how, because I know it's going to be something that I've listened to some of the conversations on your podcast, but I think for our listeners, those who also want to get something like this,
Yeah.
what is on the walk podcast?
Yeah. So if wherever you're listening to this, you can check out On This Walk.
On this walk.
And it really starts out with a lot of what my journey has been, meaning what it is that I have kind of gone through and grown through as part of coming out of burnout. And what I've started to share with everybody are a lot of the teachers, the authors, the colleagues, the guides, even the friends that I have made on this walk. So as I've gotten into studying, I went from mindfulness into Buddhism, studied a little bit of Vedic philosophy, a little bit of the Tao, studied Gnosticism, Christ consciousness, got to study with some of the indigenous for a while. And after learning and beginning to kind of immerse myself in all of these different traditions and wisdoms that are out there, what I kind of laugh about is that we're now scientifically, through neuroscience and positive psychology and the understandings of the nervous system, we're beginning to prove what all the masters knew 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago. And so this journey, this walk that I've been on and what I'm sharing is kind of from all of these different perspectives, all these different fields I've studied. It's from some of these big questions that I've been walking with for quite some time. And I will say that we're actually in the midst of because of the work I've been doing, most of the shows going forward are actually going to focus specifically for men and the journey that we are on as men and some of the ways in which we are continuing to evolve and some of the needs that we have to really step up into the type of men that we are meant to be for this planet and this world right now.
Awesome. Great. Thanks for sharing that, Luke. We're going to have all the information to reach out to Luke or connect with Luke on our podcast notes and also on YouTube as well. So feel free to reach out. It was great to have this conversation with you, Luke. I know that when next I hit that invite button again, that you'll be able to grant us your
Absolutely.
insight and knowledge on the show. So thank you. And for those watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the YouTube channel as much as you watch, and also leave a comment or review about what you experienced from listening to this conversation or watching this conversation.